My family despised me for being a simple school teacher, but when my former student made me a millionaire, my family was suddenly right there. Most people have these grand stories about how they changed the world or discovered something amazing. Mine isn't like that. I'm just Michael Pearson, a 52-year-old English teacher from a town in Ohio, so small you'd miss it if you blinked while driving through. For 30 years, I've been teaching teenagers about Shakespeare and Hemingway in a classroom with flickering fluorescent lights and desks carved with the initials of students long graduated. Every morning at 5:30, my alarm goes off. Same routine, shower, shave, and dress in one of my 5 button-up shirts that have seen better days. The coffee maker in our teacher's lounge broke last September, so now we have this vending machine that spits out what they call premium coffee for $1.25. It tastes like warm dirt, but it keeps me awake through first period. My classroom is nothing special, just 4 walls of motivational posters I bought with my own money, and a whiteboard that never quite erases properly. But to me, it's a battlefield where I fight for young minds every day. Not that they notice. Most of them are too busy scrolling through TikTok under their desks, thinking I don't see them. Last Tuesday was different, though. Amy Thompson stayed after class to work on her essay about The Great Gatsby. While most kids rush out when the bell rings, Amy actually cares. She's got these bright eyes that light up when she makes connections in literature that even I hadn't considered. Mr. Pearson, she said as we finished reviewing her draft, you're literally the only teacher who doesn't just give up on us. For a moment, I couldn't speak. In 30 years of teaching, comments like that are rare gems that make all the late nights grading papers worth it. I just nodded and told her to keep working on her conclusion paragraph. On the drive home, I kept thinking about what Amy said. It was nice to feel appreciated, especially since appreciation is in short supply at home. Catherine, my wife of 26 years, was waiting when I got there. She didn't ask about my day anymore. Those conversations dried up somewhere around our 15th anniversary. Now she just looks up from her phone long enough to remind me what a disappointment I've become. There's leftover meatloaf in the fridge, she said, not bothering to look up from her Facebook feed. David called. He needs money again. David, our 24-year-old son, graduated from community college last year and has been finding himself ever since, which mostly means playing video games in his apartment and asking for rent money. My daughter Lisa is at least in college, though she only calls when her car breaks down or when she needs me to help an assignment. I heated up the meatloaf and sat alone at our kitchen table. Catherine had already eaten and retreated to the living room to watch her reality shows. You know, she called out during a commercial, Tom Nielsen just got promoted to regional manager at Walmart. Makes 6 figures now. Remember when you two were both starting out? I remembered. Tom and I played baseball together in high school. He dropped out of college after a semester. Now he makes 3 times what I do. You could have done something like that, Catherine continued, twisting the knife, instead of wasting away with those ungrateful kids who couldn't care less about Shakespeare. I didn't argue. What was the point? We'd had this conversation 100 times. Catherine used to support my teaching. She'd even help grade papers sometimes. But years of tight budgets and watching her friends take vacations we couldn't afford had turned her bitter. The next morning in class, I was explaining Hamlet to 30 blank faces when my phone buzzed. Lisa needed my login for the school database to check something for her education class. Dad, you're not busy, right? It'll just take a second. That's what I've become to my family. The guy who's never too busy because what he does isn't important enough to count as busy. Thursday was parent-teacher conferences. I sat at my desk for 5 hours, meeting with exactly 12 parents out of my 147 students. Principal Morris stopped by at the end. Another successful conference night, Mike, she said, handing me a certificate. Teacher of the Year nominee again. That's 5 years running. I thanked her and slipped the certificate into my bag. It would join the others in my desk drawer at home. Catherine once asked if they came with a raise. When I said no, she stopped caring. When I got home that night, Catherine was waiting up, unusual for a weeknight. How'd it go? She asked, actually looking interested. I pulled out the certificate. Got nominated for Teacher of the Year again. She stared at it for a moment, then laughed. Not the good kind. That's it? That's the reward for 30 years of dedication? A piece of paper that probably cost $5 to print. I watched her walk away, feeling that familiar ache in my chest. My old watch, a graduation gift from my father, ticked loudly in the silence. Each second reminded me of time I couldn't get back. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about Catherine's words. Had I wasted my life? In the darkness, doubt crept in like an old enemy. What did I have to show for 3 decades of teaching? No savings to speak of. A family that saw me as a convenience rather than a success. Students who mostly forgot me as soon as they graduated. But then I remembered Amy's words. And Jamie Wilson, who wrote me a letter 10 years after graduation saying my class helped him become a journalist. And Marcus Lee, who went from nearly failing to getting a scholarship because I stayed late every Tuesday helping him with essays. Maybe I hadn't changed the world, but I'd changed some worlds. The next morning in the teacher's lounge, everyone was talking at once. Between sips of that terrible vending machine coffee, I gathered that someone important was coming to evaluate our school. State inspector, explained Barbara, the science teacher. From Columbus. Word is they're looking at teacher performance metrics. Gary, the gym teacher who'd been counting the days of retirement since I met him, snorted. Just another suit with a clipboard telling us how to do our jobs better with less money. But something stirred in me. An evaluation meant a chance to show what my classroom was really about. Not just test scores, but connections. Growth. The stuff that doesn't show up in spreadsheets. When I asked, 2 weeks, Barbara said. They're observing select classrooms. Morris gets to choose which ones. For the first time in years, I felt a spark of something like hope. Or maybe desperation. If Principal Morris picked me, maybe this was my chance to prove something. Not to Catherine or even my kids, but to myself. That my choice to spend my life in that classroom hadn't been a mistake. As I walked to my first period class, my mind was already racing with ideas. I'd show them my best lesson, the one on perspective in To Kill a Mockingbird, that even got through the kids in the back row. I imagined Catherine's face if someone important actually recognized my work. Would she finally see value in what I did? Would my kids look at me differently if someone with authority validated my career choice? Or was I just setting myself up for another disappointment? Another reminder that I was just a small-town English teacher who could have been something more? I didn't know the answer. But for the first time in longer than I could remember, I was eager to find out. The news about the inspector spread through our school like wildfire. By Monday morning, every teacher was straightening their classroom and updating their lesson plans. Principal Morris called me into her office after third period. Michael, I've selected your class for observation, she said, shuffling through some papers. The inspector will be here Thursday. Your 5th period American literature class. My stomach did a flip. 5th period was my most challenging group. A mix of overachievers like Amy and kids who'd rather be anywhere else. But it was also where I did my best work. I recommended you because of your experience, Morris continued, and your nomination record. Consider it a compliment. I nodded, trying to look confident while my mind raced through 1,000 scenarios, most of them ending with me embarrassing myself in front of some state official. When I got to the teacher's lounge for lunch, Barbara had intel. Her cousin worked in the state education department and recognized the inspector's name. Richard Harmon, she whispered, as if saying it too loud might summon him early. Former corporate consultant turned education efficiency expert. Apparently, he's evaluating teachers for some new merit-based promotion system. Gary nearly choked on his sandwich. Merit-based? You mean they might actually pay good teachers more than bad ones? Revolutionary concept. But I wasn't listening to Gary's sarcasm. Merit-based promotion. The words echoed in my head all afternoon. For years, I'd watched younger, less experienced teachers move up to curriculum coordinator positions or transfer to wealthy suburban districts because they had the right connections. Maybe this was my chance. I spent that evening planning the best lesson I could imagine. A deep dive into The Great Gatsby that would show how Fitzgerald's critique of the American dream still resonated today. I'd use contemporary examples, facilitate meaningful discussion, and showcase how literature connects to students' lives. By midnight, I had a PowerPoint presentation that even Catherine might be impressed by. Speaking of Catherine, she was less than enthusiastic when I told her about the observation. So this guy shows up, watches you teach for 40 minutes, and suddenly your career takes off. She didn't even look up from her phone. Forgive me if I don't start house hunting in the suburbs just yet. I tried explaining the potential. This could lead to a district position. Maybe even department head if Morris retires next year like everyone says. Catherine finally looked at me, eyebrows raised. Department head? That's an extra of what, $2,000 a year? For twice the work? Dream big, Michael. David came downstairs just then, looking for his old baseball jersey for some theme party. When I mentioned the observation, he just shrugged. Cool, Dad. Hey, can you get me tickets for Friday's basketball game? Coach Reynolds still gives you the faculty discount, right? Lisa called later that night, needing a sociology textbook from the school library for a paper due next week. Neither of my kids asked about the lesson plan I'd spent hours perfecting. Why would they? To them, I was just their dad who happened to work at a school, a convenient resource when they needed something related to education. The next 2 days flew by in a blur of preparation. I practiced my lesson during lunch breaks, refined discussion questions, and even bought a new tie for the occasion. The old Michael would have felt pathetic getting excited about an observation, but something about this opportunity felt different. Like maybe, just maybe, 30 years of dedication might finally pay off. Wednesday night, disaster struck. I was printing handouts of the lesson when our ancient printer at school jammed, then made a horrifying grinding noise before shutting down completely. Our tech guy had left early, and the office secretary informed me he wouldn't be back until Friday. I called Catherine to tell her I'd be late. The office max closes at 9. I could still make it. Seriously? She sounded exasperated. You're going to spend our own money on handouts for this dog and pony show? Before I could argue, Amy Thompson, my dedicated student, texted me. I'd given my number to all my AP students for homework emergencies, but she was the only one who ever used it for actual school purposes. Mr. Pearson, my dad has a printer you can use. We're only 10 minutes from school. I thanked Catherine for her support and drove to Amy's house, a modest ranch-style home with a perfectly maintained lawn. Her parents were surprisingly welcoming. Turns out her father had been following Amy's progress in my class all year. They insisted I stay for coffee while my handouts printed, asking about the lesson plan and seeming genuinely interested in what I was trying to accomplish. It was nearly midnight when I got home. Catherine was already in bed, pretending to be asleep. The light from her phone screen under the covers gave her away, but I didn't call her on it. I was too tired for another argument. Thursday morning arrived with all the dread of final exam day. I wore my new tie, dark blue with tiny books on it, a Christmas gift from a student years ago that I'd never had the courage to wear. I arrived an hour early to set up my classroom, arranging desks in a discussion circle rather than the usual rows. By fifth period, I felt like I might throw up. The students filed in, looking curious about the new arrangement. Amy gave me an encouraging thumbs up from her seat. 5 minutes into the period, Principal Morris appeared at the door with the inspector. Richard Harmon was exactly what I'd imagined, mid-40s, expensive suit, and the smug expression of someone who'd never taught a day in his life, but was confident he knew how to fix education. He carried a leather portfolio that probably cost more than my monthly mortgage payment. Please continue, Mr. Pearson, Morris said after introductions. Pretend we're not even here. Right. Pretend the most important professional evaluation of my career wasn't happening. Sure. I took a deep breath and began my carefully rehearsed introduction to Gatsby's exploration of wealth and class in America. The students seemed engaged, even the usual back row sleepers. When I connected Gatsby's desperate pursuit of Daisy to modern celebrity culture, several hands shot up with observations. The discussion was flowing better than I could have hoped. I glanced at Harmon, who was writing something in his notepad. He caught my eye and nodded slightly. That's when technology decided to remind me why I usually stuck to chalk and blackboards. The PowerPoint presentation, my masterpiece of modern teaching techniques. froze completely. Then the projector started flickering before going completely dark. I felt sweat beading on my forehead as I tried troubleshooting. The remote wasn't responding. The computer seemed fine, but nothing was displaying. Harmon was writing furiously now, and I could practically see my opportunities slipping away. Technical difficulties, I said, trying to sound casual. Let's proceed without the slides. But my mind went blank. All my carefully planned transitions were tied to those visuals. I stood there, feeling 50 pairs of eyes on me, including 2 that were determining my professional future. Mr. Pearson, Amy's voice broke the awkward silence. Remember what you taught us about Fitzgerald's writing process? How he had to adapt when his early drafts weren't working. I looked at her, confused for a moment before understanding dawned. Yes, I managed. Adaptation is essential for writers and teachers. Another student, Jason, who rarely spoke in class, jumped in. You were going to show us those quotes about the green light, right? I actually wrote them down. He held up his notebook. Like a well-rehearsed play I hadn't known we were performing, other students began contributing parts of the lesson I'd lost with the technology. They'd been paying attention all year, more than I'd realized. Mr. Pearson always says technology fails, but thinking never does. Amy announced to Harmon, who raised an eyebrow. He taught us to rely on our minds, not machines. I'd never said anything so profound in my life, but I wasn't about to correct her. For the remaining 30 minutes, we had the most organic, student-led discussion I'd witnessed in years. They debated Gatsby's illusion versus reality, the corruption of the American dream, and how social mobility had changed since the 1920s. I facilitated when needed, but mostly watched in amazement as my students saved not just a lesson, but possibly my career. When the bell rang, Harmon approached my desk while the students filed out. Amy lingered by the door, clearly wanted to know how it went. Your lesson organization was. He paused, glancing at his notes. Unconventional. The technology issues were unfortunate. My heart sank. However, he continued, I've rarely seen students so invested in a literature discussion. They clearly respect you, and more importantly, they've internalized critical thinking skills. That's hard to quantify, but ultimately more valuable. He closed the portfolio. I'll be submitting my full evaluation to the district next week. Good work, Mr. Pearson. After he left, I collapsed into my chair, emotionally drained. Had it gone well? I honestly couldn't tell. The technology disaster might have ruined everything, or maybe the students' response had salvaged it. I wouldn't know until a report came out. As I was packing up my bag, Mark Jensen from the history department poked his head in. Her Harmon was in your class today. How'd it go? I gave him a noncommittal shrug. Could have been worse, I guess. Mark nodded sympathetically. Hey, speaking of former students making good, did you see that article about Andrew Mercer? It was in the Columbus Dispatch yesterday. Andrew Mercer? The name took a moment to register. Skinny kid, glasses, graduated maybe 10 years ago. That's him. Apparently, he's developed some kind of tech thing that's got Silicon Valley buzzing. The article mentioned he grew up here. Andrew, I remembered him clearly now. Quiet, brilliant, always reading science fiction novels hidden inside his textbooks. I'd caught him once, and instead of confiscating the book, I'd recommended other authors he might enjoy. We'd had long conversations about dystopian futures and the ethics of technology after class sometimes. Is he coming back to town? I asked, suddenly curious. Dunno, Mark said, already moving toward the door, but the article quoted him saying something about a teacher who changed his life. Made me wonder if it was you. Long after Mark left, I sat at my desk, staring at the blank projector screen. Andrew Mercer, a former student doing something important in the world. And just maybe I'd had something to do with it. For the first time in years, I felt a flicker of something beyond the daily grind of lesson plans and family disappointment. Something like purpose. That night, I couldn't stop thinking about Andrew Mercer. After Mark mentioned his name, memories came flooding back. Not just of Andrew the student, but a period that had changed everything in my home life a decade ago. A time that Looking back, may have been the beginning of the end for Catherine's respect for my career. Sleep wasn't happening, so I got up and dug through my old desk drawer, past the Teacher of the Year certificates and handwritten thank you notes, until I found what I was looking for, a yearbook from 10 years ago. Andrew's senior year. I flipped through the pages until I found him. Skinny kid with wire-rimmed glasses that were always slightly crooked. Not athletic, not popular, but brilliant in a way that most teachers missed because he rarely spoke up in class. Except mine. I first really noticed Andrew during my prep period in the library. Most teachers use that time to grade papers or chat in a lounge, but I preferred the quiet of the stacks. That particular day, I rounded a corner to find Andrew hunched over at a computer station. The ancient desktop opened up with its guts exposed. He was using a combination of electrical tape, paper clips, and what looked like pliers from the shop class to perform some kind of surgery on the motherboard. Ms. Winters, our librarian, was hovering nearby, looking both impressed and terrified. "Mr. Pearson," she'd whisper when she spotted me. "He says he can fix it. Should I stop him?" The computer had been out of commission for weeks. Our tech support consisted of a guy who visited from the district office every other Friday, with a waiting list longer than the lunch line on pizza day. "Let's see what happens," I told her, curious. 20 minutes later, the ancient Dell was running faster than it had in years. Andrew explained something about overclocking and clearing cache files that went completely over my head, but the pride in his eyes when the machine booted up was unmistakable. After that, I started paying more attention to Andrew in class. He sat in the back corner, and while other students dozed through Shakespeare, I'd catch him reading programming manuals hidden inside his textbook. Instead of confiscating them, I asked him about them after class. "I want to build things," he'd explained, suddenly animated. "Software that makes a difference. But all the good learning resources cost money." His mom worked double shifts at the diner and as a night cleaner at the mall. College was a distant dream, let alone expensive programming textbooks. 2 weeks later, I found myself at Barnes & Noble in the next town over, purchasing Python programming for beginners with my own credit card. Catherine and I had an unspoken agreement. Major purchases were discussed, especially with David's braces and Leah's upcoming high school expenses. But I didn't consider the $49.95 book major, just an investment in a promising kid. When I gave Andrew the book the next day, his reaction was worth every penny. He stared at it like I'd handed him the keys to a kingdom. "This is the good one," he'd said, his voice barely audible. "The one with the advanced applications section." I just nodded, feeling something I hadn't felt in years, the pure satisfaction of making a genuine difference. "You've got a gift, Andrew. Don't waste it because of circumstances." What I didn't expect was Catherine's reaction when the credit card bill arrived. $50? On some random student? Her voice had that dangerous calm that was worse than yelling. "While we're trying to save for David's college applications next year," I tried explaining about Andrew's potential, his situation, how sometimes a small gesture could change a life. She wasn't having it. "Your own son needed a graphing calculator last semester, and you made him get a part-time job to pay for it. But you'll buy textbooks for strangers?" She had a point. David had wanted a TI 84 for his calculus class, and I had insisted he earn the money himself. Teaching responsibility. I called it, but the truth was, I'd been harsher with my own kids than with my students. Maybe because I expected more from them. Or maybe because I took them for granted. The argument escalated until Catherine dropped a bombshell. "You're more invested in your students' futures than your own children's." The accusation stung because there was truth in it. I stayed late helping students with college essays while missing David's baseball games. I spent weekends grading papers instead of helping Leah with her science projects. I justified it by telling myself I was setting an example of work ethic and dedication. But from their perspective, I was just absent. David and Leah found out about the book for Andrew during a particularly tense dinner the following week. Their reactions were predictably hurt. "So some random kid gets special treatment while we get lectures about budgeting?" David had muttered. Leah was more direct. "You love your job more than us." I tried explaining that it wasn't competition, that caring about my students didn't diminish my love for them. But teenage logic is absolute, and in their minds, every minute spent on someone else's kid was a minute stolen from them. The rift only widened when Andrew started working as a janitor at our school to save for college. The administration had a program that let a few students work part-time after hours, and Andrew took full advantage, mopping floors and emptying trash until 9 p.m. 4 nights a week. I'd often stay late those evenings, ostensibly grading, but really making sure Andrew had someone to talk to during his breaks. We discussed books, coding projects, his dreams of Silicon Valley. Those conversations in empty classrooms with the smell of floor cleaner in the air were some of the most genuine teaching moments of my career. Catherine started referring to those nights as your time with the golden boy, her voice dripping with resentment. The worst part was I couldn't entirely blame her. I was prioritizing a student when my own family felt neglected. One night, after I had missed Leah's choir concert to help Andrew with college application essays, Catherine confronted me directly. What are you trying to prove? That you can save one kid when you're losing your own. I didn't have a good answer. Just the uncomfortable feeling that maybe I was using Andrew's success to compensate for my own career frustrations. Or worse, using him as an escape from the growing tensions at home. But then Andrew would say things like, "You're the only one who ever believed this was possible for me." And I convinced myself it was worth the cost. The moral struggle weighed on me daily. Was I betraying my family by investing so much in a student? Or would I be betraying my calling as a teacher by not helping a promising kid break the cycle of limited opportunities? The internal debate reached its peak the day Andrew received his acceptance letter to a state university with a partial scholarship. He'd burst into my classroom after school, waving the envelope and grinning like he'd won the lottery. In many ways, he had, I got in, computer science program. He was practically bouncing with excitement. I still need to figure out the rest of the tuition, but I can keep working and take out some loans. The joy in his eyes made all the arguments at home seem distant and small. This was why I became a teacher, to open doors for kids who might otherwise be forgotten by the system. Catherine didn't share my enthusiasm when I told her the news over dinner. "That's nice," she'd said flatly. "Did you sign that permission slip for David's field trip yet? It's been on the counter for 3 days. I hadn't. It was buried under a stack of essays I'd been grading. Another small failure as a parent. Another piece of evidence for her case against my priorities. The day before Andrew left for college, he stopped by my classroom after the final bell. Most students disappeared the second graduation ended, eager to distance themselves from high school. But Andrew came back, carrying something wrapped in newspaper. "I want to thank you," he'd said, awkwardly extending the package, "for everything." Inside was a mug with "World's Best Teacher" printed on it. Cheesy and mass-produced, probably purchased in the dollar store with his janitor wages. It was the most meaningful gift I'd ever received. "Mr. Pearson, I promise I'll make you proud. Someday I'll pay you back for believing in me." I'd brushed it off with a joke about remembering to cite Shakespeare in his computer code, uncomfortable with the raw emotion of the moment. But the truth was, his success already felt like payment enough. After he left, I sat in my empty classroom holding that cheap mug, wondering if I'd done the right thing by investing so much in him at the cost of friction at home. There were no easy answers, just the hope that somehow everyone would understand eventually. The first semester, Andrew emailed regularly with updates about his classes and campus life. Then the emails became less frequent and eventually stopped altogether. I wasn't surprised. College was a time for reinvention, for looking forward rather than back. The best students often outgrew their high school mentors, as they should. Catherine didn't miss the opportunity to point out his silence. "See? You mortgage your family's happiness for this kid, and he doesn't even keep in touch. Was it worth it?" I pretended it didn't bother me, but her words struck a nerve. Had Andrew just used me as a stepping stone? Had I misread our connection? Those doubts gnawed at me, especially during parent-teacher conferences when I'd see other students I'd invested in walking past without acknowledgement. Years passed with no word from Andrew. Life went on. David graduated college and moved to Cincinnati for a job in sales. Leah finished her degree and was working for a nonprofit in Columbus. They visited occasionally, but conversations remained superficial. The childhood wounds of feeling secondary to my students still apparent in subtle ways. Catherine and I settled into a routine of polite coexistence. The passion and partnership of our early years faded to a dull companionship, based more on habit than connection. Teaching became just a job. I still care about my students, but I kept a professional distance, no longer bringing their stories home or investing personally in their futures. The memory of Andrew became a cautionary tale I told myself about boundaries and priorities. Until today. The morning after Mark mentioned the article, I was fixing my coffee when Bill Hawkins from next door leaned over the fence. "Hey, Michael, saw your former student on the news last night. What was his name again?" "The computer genius." My hand froze mid-stir. "Andrew Mercer?" "That's the one. Some big shot in California now. Created some kind of software program that's got all the tech companies in a bidding war. They mentioned he grew up here, went to your school." I nodded, tried to appear casually interested while my mind raced. Good for him. Always knew he had potential. Said he was coming back to Ohio for some presentation or launch thing. Funny to think someone from our little town making it that big, huh? I spent the rest of the day distracted, checking news sites for any mention of Andrew between classes. I found the article Mark had referenced, a profile in the Columbus Dispatch business section. Andrew, no longer the skinny, awkward teenager, but a confident young man in a tailored suit, standing in front of a sleek office building. The headline read, "Ohio native's AI innovation draws $50 million in venture capital." The article described his company, something about artificial intelligence in healthcare that I couldn't quite follow. But one quote jumped out at me. "I wouldn't be here without a teacher who saw something in me when no one else did." He hadn't named me, but the timing fit. An ember of pride glowed somewhere in my chest, tempered by the knowledge of what that investment had cost my family relationships. That evening, I was grading papers at the kitchen table when my ancient email notification sound pinged from my laptop, probably just a weekly school bulletin or a parent asking about missing homework. I almost ignored it. When I finally checked, the subject line made my heart skip. "Long overdue thank you, Andrew Mercer." The email was brief but hit me like a thunderbolt. "Mr. Pearson, it's been too long since we've spoken, and that's entirely my fault. I'm returning to Ohio next month for a product launch and would be honored if you would attend as my special guest. This technology exists because you believed in me when no one else did. I've never forgotten that Python book or our conversations after hours. Details attached. I hope you'll come. Andrew." I stared at the screen for what felt like hours. Emotions I couldn't name washing over me. Validation? Vindication? A complicated mixture of pride and lingering guilt about the family friction my mentorship had caused. The attachment was a formal invitation to a presentation at the Columbus Convention Center, followed by a private dinner. 1 month from today. Catherine walked in just as I was reading it for the third time, my hand slightly shaking. "What's got you so worked up?" she asked, noticing my expression. I couldn't find the words to explain what this meant, how it simultaneously justified and complicated all those old arguments about where my time and energy should have gone. So I simply turned the screen toward her. "Andrew Mercer," I said softly. He remembered. For 3 days, I carried Andrew's email like a secret treasure, reading it during lunch breaks and between classes. I hadn't mentioned it to anyone at school, partly because I wasn't sure what to say. Remember that student I invested in at the cost of my family's happiness? Turns out he's successful now. It sounded both self-congratulatory and painfully revealing. At home, Catherine's reaction to the invitation was predictably skeptical. I showed her the email after dinner while she scrolled through Facebook on her tablet. "So your golden boy finally remembered you existed," she said, barely glancing at the screen. "Let me guess. He's launching some app and wants all his old teachers there for publicity photos?" I explained that it seemed more personal than that. He specifically invited me as his special guest. Catherine raised an eyebrow. "Special guest. Fancy. And what does he want in return? Investment money? A loan?" These tech startups are always looking for investors. Her cynicism stung, but I couldn't entirely blame her. Our history with Andrew wasn't exactly filled with happy memories for her. I don't think he wants anything, I said. The article said his company already has millions in venture capital funding. Well, aren't you the proud papa? She muttered, turning back to her tablet. After a moment, she added, You're going, aren't you? I nodded. I thought I might. Of course you are. When David called the next day to ask about borrowing our lawnmower, I mentioned the invitation, trying to sound casual. Wait, that skinny kid who was always hanging around after school? He sounded genuinely surprised. The one Mom used to call your extracurricular project. That's the one, I said, uncomfortable with the reminder of Catherine's nickname. And now he's some big shot in Silicon Valley? That's wild. David paused. So what's he want? The immediate assumption that Andrew wanted something bothered me, even though I'd had the same thought initially. He's invited me to the launch of his new product. In Columbus. Another pause. Is it, like, worth money? The invitation? I fought back a sigh. It's not that kind of invitation, David. It's just a professional courtesy. Right. Hey, while I've got you, any chance you could help me with the down payment on that used F-150 I've been looking at? Just a loan until my commission check comes through next month? The abrupt pivot to asking for money wasn't subtle, but it was pure David. I told him I'd think about it, which was our family code for probably not. When I shared the news with Leah over our weekly phone call, her reaction was slightly different. So all those hours you spent mentoring him instead of coming to my school events finally paid off? There was an edge to her voice, but also something else. Curiosity, maybe. It wasn't like that, I said, then realized it probably was exactly like that from her perspective. Whatever, Dad. It's cool that he remembered you, I guess. Maybe he'll hook you up with stock options or something. She laughed, but not unkindly. You could finally take that trip to London you and Mom always talked about before you guys got so, before we became the hollow shell of a marriage we were now. She meant. Before disappointment and resentment became our primary modes of communication. It's not about money, I told her, but the words sounded empty even to me. The day of the presentation arrived with unexpected nervousness. I hadn't felt this anxious since my observation with Inspector Harmon. I pulled my one decent suit from the back of the closet, the one I'd worn to David's college graduation 4 years ago. It hung a bit looser now, my frame having shrunk with age in that way middle-aged men's bodies sometimes do, subtly collapsing inward. You're actually dressing up for this? Catherine asked, watching me struggle with the tie I rarely wore. It's a professional event, I explained, at the Columbus Convention Center. She straightened my tie with practiced efficiency, a flash of the old intimacy we once shared. Well, try not to spill anything on yourself. That's your only good suit. I caught the 6:15 train to Columbus, surrounded by business commuters in tailored suits and expensive watches. My own timepiece, my father's old Timex with a cracked face, felt suddenly inadequate. I tucked it deeper into my pocket, feeling like an imposter among these sleep professionals. The convention center was a gleaming structure of glass and steel, nothing like the worn brick of my high school. Inside, tech industry types clustered in animated conversation, wielding terminology I barely understood, AI integration, neural networks, machine learning protocols. The coffee bar charged $9 for a latte, which I declined on principle. Instead, I wandered the lobby, examining displays of bleeding-edge technology, holographic interfaces, screens thinner than paper, robots delivering champagne to guests. I felt like a fossil who had somehow wandered into a museum of the future. I don't belong here, I thought, fingering the frayed edge of my suit jacket sleeve. What was I thinking? Just as I was considering a dignified retreat, a voice called out from across the lobby. Mr. Pearson? Oh my God, you actually came. Andrew Mercer was approaching quickly, weaving through the crowd with purpose. Gone was a skinny, awkward teenager with the taped glasses. This Andrew wore a perfectly tailored charcoal suit, designer glasses, and the confident posture of someone used to being listened to. But his smile, that was the same. Genuine, slightly lopsided, with a hint of the old shyness. Before I could formulate a proper greeting, he enveloped me in an enthusiastic hug, drawing curious glances from nearby executives. "I can't believe you're here. When I saw your RSVP, I was thrilled, but I wasn't sure if you'd actually make it." He stepped back, examining me with undisguised delight. "You look exactly the same." A polite lie, but I appreciated it. "You, however, have upgraded considerably," I joked, gesturing to his sleek appearance. "The suit? Just window dressing," he laughed. "Still the same nerd underneath, trust me. Just with better tailoring and contacts instead of those terrible glasses." A woman in a sharp business suit approached, tablet in hand. "Andrew, we need you backstage in 5. The investors are asking about the practical applications portion of the presentation." "Be right there, Melissa." He turned back to me. "I've got to run, but I've saved you a front row seat. And we're having dinner after, just a small group. You'll join us, right?" Before I could answer, he was being whisked away by his assistant, calling back, "We have so much to catch up on." I found my reserved seat marked with an elegant placard bearing my name, Michael Pearson, Guest of Honor. The title felt both excessive and strangely validating. Around me, tech journalists and industry insiders settled into expressions of studied boredom, the look of people who attended revolutionary product launches every Tuesday. The lights dimmed, and Andrew took the stage to enthusiastic applause. He moved with the practiced ease of someone accustomed to public speaking, nothing like the nervous kid who trembled through his book report on Brave New World a decade ago. "Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Andrew Mercer, founder and CEO of Neurotech, and today I'm thrilled to introduce you to HealthMind, an AI diagnostic assistant that's going to transform healthcare accessibility in underserved communities." What followed was a presentation filled with technical jargon I only partially understood, but the essence was clear. Andrew had created something remarkable, a system that could help doctors diagnose diseases more accurately, particularly in areas without specialists. The demonstration videos showed rural clinics and community health centers using his software to identify conditions that might otherwise go undetected. I sat straighter in my chair, a strange pride swelling in my chest. This wasn't some trivial app for ordering food or posting photos. This was meaningful work that could save lives. Halfway through the presentation, Andrew paused, his expression becoming more personal. "I want to take a moment to talk about why this matters to me," he said, his voice softer. "I grew up in a small town in Ohio, where my mom worked 2 jobs to keep food on the table. When she got sick my senior year of high school, the local doctor missed her thyroid condition for months because we couldn't afford to see a specialist." I blinked in surprise. I'd known his mother worked multiple jobs, but he'd never mentioned her illness. "But I was lucky," Andrew continued. "I had people who believed in me when the odds were stacked against me, particularly one person." My stomach tightened as Andrew's gaze found mine in the front row. "My high school English teacher, Mr. Michael Pearson, is here today." He gestured toward me, and suddenly hundreds of eyes turned in my direction. Mr. Pearson saw potential in a weird kid who was taking apart school computers when he should have been analyzing Shakespeare. Nervous laughter rippled through the audience. I tried to maintain a dignified expression while fighting the urge to slide under my seat. When I couldn't afford programming books, Mr. Pearson bought them with his own money. When I was working as a janitor to save for college, he stayed late to teach me things that had nothing to do with his curriculum. When everyone else saw a poor kid with limited prospects, he saw possibility. The room had gone completely silent. I felt a lump forming in my throat. The truth is, I wouldn't be standing here today without his belief in me. Those $50 he spent on my first Python book, that investment has now yielded a company valued at over $50 million. Appreciative murmurs filled the room. Someone near me whispered, "Great PR story." "But this isn't just a nice anecdote about a dedicated teacher," Andrew continued, his voice taking on more business-like tone. "It's a lesson about overlooked potential and the power of targeted intervention, which is exactly what HealthMind is designed to do: identify potential health issues that might otherwise be missed, particularly in communities without adequate resources." He seamlessly transitioned back to the technical aspects of his presentation, but I barely heard the rest. My mind was stuck on the unexpected public acknowledgement and the staggering number he'd mentioned. $50 million? For a company built by the skinny kid I'd helped a decade ago? When the presentation ended to enthusiastic applause, Andrew was immediately surrounded by reporters and industry people. I lingered awkwardly near my seat, unsure if I should wait or slip away. Before I could decide, Andrew's assistant appeared at my elbow. "Mr. Pearson? Andrew asked me to bring you backstage. This way, please." She led me through a side door and down a corridor to a green room filled with refreshments and a small group of people in expensive suits. Andrew broke away from a conversation the moment he saw me. "There he is," he exclaimed, guiding me to the center of the room. "Everyone, this is Michael Pearson, the teacher I was telling you about." What followed was a surreal blur of introductions to venture capitalists, medical technology experts, and software engineers, all of whom seemed genuinely interested in meeting the teacher who had discovered Andrew Mercer. I shook hands, accepted business cards, and tried to say intelligent things about an industry I knew nothing about. "Your investment paid off better than Wall Street," joked one venture capitalist, a Harvard MBA type with perfect teeth. I wasn't thinking of it as an investment. I replied honestly, just trying to help a promising student. "Well, your instincts were better than most of our analysts," he laughed. After the crowd thinned, Andrew guided me to a quiet corner. I meant every word I said out there, he told me, his expression sincere. "You changed my life, Mr. Pearson. You did all the hard work." I insisted. "I just bought a book." "It wasn't just a book." He shook his head. "It was believing in me when no one else did, including myself." Before I could downplay it further, he gestured to a serious-looking woman in a tailored pantsuit. "This is Eleanor Wong, my attorney. She has something for you to sign." The attorney approached with a leather portfolio. "Mr. Pearson, we prepared some documents for your review." "Documents?" I asked, confused. Andrew smiled. "I want to make you an honorary board member of Neurotech, with a grant of founding shares in the company." I stared at him, certain I'd misheard. "I'm sorry, what?" "You're getting stock in the company," he explained simply. 3% of founding shares, to be exact. My mind struggled to process this. 3% didn't sound like much, but of $50 million, that's $1.5 million. I stammered, doing the math. Andrew and his attorney exchanged glances. "Actually," the attorney said gently, "our latest valuation after today's funding announcement is closer to $75 million. So approximately $2.25 million at current valuation, with significant growth potential." The room seemed to tilt slightly. I gripped the back of a nearby chair. Thinking of my mortgage with 12 years left, my meager retirement account, the constant struggle to make ends meet on a teacher's salary. "I can't accept this," I said automatically. "It's too much." "It's not charity," Andrew insisted. "It's acknowledgement of your early belief in this company. Think of it as angel investor returns." "But I didn't invest in your company," I protested. "I just bought you a textbook." And that was the seed that grew into all of this. He gestured around us. "Please, Mr. Pearson, let me do this." The attorney added smoothly, "The paperwork is straightforward. No obligations on your part, just ownership of the shares. You can sell them during our next funding round if you prefer liquidation to holding equity." I felt overwhelmed, out of my depth in this world of venture capital and stock options. My old teacher's watch seemed to burn in my pocket, a relic from a different life. "I need time to think," I managed to say. Andrew nodded. "Of course. Take the documents home. Review them. But know this is happening, Mr. Pearson. You're getting those shares one way or another." The train ride home was a blur. I stared at the leather portfolio in my lap, containing paperwork that could fundamentally change my financial reality overnight. Was this really happening? To me, Michael Pearson, the teacher everyone, including my own family, saw as the definition of modest achievement? I walked from the station in a daze, barely noticing the familiar streets of my neighborhood. When I entered our house, Catherine was waiting up pretending to read a magazine, but clearly curious. "How was it?" she asked, trying to sound casual. "Interesting," I replied, unsure where to begin. "Did your former student remember you?" He did more than remember me. I set the portfolio on the coffee table between us. He announced his company is worth $75 million, told the entire tech industry I was a reason for his success, and then gave me 3% of his company. Catherine's magazine slipped from her fingers. "He what?" I explained everything. The presentation, the public acknowledgement, the shocking offer of shares. With each detail, her expression shifted from skepticism to astonishment. $2.25 million, she repeated, her voice barely above a whisper. "For buying him a book?" Apparently. She stared at the portfolio as if it might vanish if she looked away. "Are you going to accept it?" "I don't know yet." I admitted it feels unearned. Catherine's laugh had a brittle edge. "After 30 years of thankless teaching for poverty wages? Michael, if anyone has earned unexpected good fortune, it's you." The sudden reversal of her usual criticism threw me. For years, she questioned my career choices, highlighted my financial limitations, compared me unfavorably to friends who'd chosen more lucrative paths. Now she was my cheerleader? "I always knew your dedication to students would pay off someday," she continued, reaching for my hand. "You've always been so good at seeing potential in people." I looked at her hand on mine, this unfamiliar gesture of affection and support. Where was this Catherine when I was doubting my entire career? When I needed reassurance that my work mattered? "I need a drink," I muttered, heading to the kitchen for some water. As I stood at the sink, I could hear Catherine's excited voice in the living room, obviously on the phone. I shook my head. She was already spreading the news. When I returned 5 minutes later, my phone buzzed with texts from both David and Leah. Apparently, news traveled at light speed. "David, Dad, just heard about your former student's big success from Mom. Any chance he's hiring? My sales experience would be perfect for a tech startup." "Yeah. Hey, Dad, Mom told me about your student making it big. So cool he remembered you. By the way, I have a great idea for an education app if he's looking to diversify his portfolio." I stared at the messages, a strange hollowness expanding in my chest. My family, who had rolled their eyes at my teaching career for decades, were suddenly very interested now that it had a dollar value attached. Catherine was already making plans beside me. We could finally renovate the kitchen, and that trip to London we always talk about. Oh, and maybe we should look at retirement communities in Florida instead of staying here. Your pension would go so much further with this as a supplement. As she chattered on, I looked around our modest living room with its worn furniture and faded photographs. For years, this house had felt like a testament to my limited achievements. Now it felt like something else entirely, a reminder of what was real and what wasn't. My family's sudden enthusiasm felt as insubstantial as the holographic displays at the convention center. Meanwhile, the genuine pride I'd felt watching Andrew present his meaningful work, that was solid, real. I fingered my father's old watch in my pocket and wondered, what exactly should I do with this unexpected windfall and this equally unexpected love for my family? It's amazing how quickly life can change. One day you're an overlooked high school English teacher with a drawer full of meaningless certificates, and the next you're the visionary educator who discovered Andrew Mercer. That's what the Hillsdale Gazette called me in their front page story last week. The same local paper that couldn't be bothered to cover our school's academic decathlon victory 3 years ago suddenly wanted an exclusive on my talent-spotting prowess. The interview was surreal. The reporter kept asking how I identified Andrew's potential, as if I had some magical formula for predicting future tech entrepreneurs. What could I say? That I simply treated a struggling kid with basic human decency? That didn't fit their narrative of me as some kind of startup whisperer. The attention spread beyond our small town after Andrew's company issued a press release about my board position and equity grant. Suddenly, I was fielding calls from educational podcasts and receiving LinkedIn connection requests from people I'd never met. Principal Morris even suggested I give a talk at the next District Professional Development Day on nurturing entrepreneurial mindsets. My colleagues' reactions were a study in human nature. Gary from the gym, who'd spent 20 years telling anyone who'd listened that teaching was a dead-end career, now clapped me on the back in the hallway. Always knew you were playing the long game, Mike. Smart move investing in that kid. Barbara brought me coffee unasked, not from the vending machine, but from a fancy place downtown. The same Barbara who'd voted against my department budget, increased requests 3 consecutive years. We should really get lunch sometime, she suggested, hovering by my desk. I've got this nephew who's brilliant with computers. Maybe you could introduce him to your Andrew. My Andrew, as if I owned him or had created him, as if our connection was now a commodity to be traded. At home, the transformation was even more dramatic. Catherine had redecorated our living room almost overnight, replacing our worn furniture with pieces I didn't recognize. Just a few things to freshen up the place, she explained when I questioned the expense. We need to start living like who we are now. And who were we now? The same couple who'd been drifting apart for decades, just with a better couch? David called daily, sometimes twice, with ideas for startups he wanted to pitch to Andrew. His latest was an app to help people find parking spaces, which he insisted was revolutionary, despite my pointing out that several such apps already existed. But mine would have a social component, he insisted. Andrew would get it. When can you introduce us? Leah's approach was more direct. She simply asked for a small loan of $50,000 for a down payment on a condo near her office. It's an investment opportunity, she explained, as if that would make it more appealing. And it's nothing compared to what you're getting from those shares. I hadn't even signed the paperwork yet, and my family was already spending money we didn't have. The most difficult moment came during a follow-up interview with a regional business magazine. The journalist asked about my family's reaction to my unexpected windfall. They must be so proud, she prompted, her recorder capturing every word. To have supported your teaching career all these years, and now see it pay off so dramatically. I felt something twist inside me. Supported? Catherine had called my career a waste for decades. My kids had treated my profession as an inconvenience at best, an embarrassment at worst. Now they were proud, but I smiled and gave her what she wanted. They always believed I was on the right path. I said, the irony burning in my throat. They're thrilled to see this recognition. As the words left my mouth, I felt something break loose inside me, the last tether of illusion about my family. For years, I told myself that deep down, beneath their criticism and indifference, they respected my chosen path. Now I had to face the truth. They didn't care about my teaching or the students whose lives I'd touched. They cared about what I could provide. It wasn't even about the money. Not really. It was about what I'd wanted all along, their love and respect, and the painful realization that I could have neither without the accompanying financial success. That night, I couldn't sleep. Around 2 a.m., I sent Andrew an email asking if we could talk. To my surprise, he called immediately, despite the time difference in California. Everything okay, Mr. Pearson? His voice was concerned. I found myself pouring out everything, the family dynamics, the sudden attention, the hollow feeling of being valued only for what I could provide financially. Andrew listened quietly, then said something I'll never forget. Money doesn't change who people are. It just reveals who they always were. He told me about similar experiences after his success. Distant relatives appearing with business proposals. Old classmates who bullied him suddenly claiming lifelong friendship. What did you do? I asked. Created boundaries, he said simply, and redirected the wealth towards something meaningful. He suggested I consider putting some of the shares into a foundation supporting educational initiatives. Give other kids a chance you gave me. We talked for an hour, strategizing approaches. By the time we hung up, I had the beginnings of a plan. The next morning, I contacted Eleanor Wong, Andrew's attorney, and arranged for a portion of my shares, roughly half, to be placed in a new educational foundation. The Shakespeare's Dreamers Fund would provide resources for promising students from disadvantaged backgrounds, with a focus on both STEM and humanities education. When I told Catherine about my decision, her reaction was predictably unhappy. You're giving away $1 million? Her voice rose with each word. To strangers? Without consulting me? I'm investing it, I corrected her, in students who need it, just like I invested in Andrew. David and Leah were equally displeased. There were tears, accusations, arguments about family loyalty. The newly purchased furniture suddenly felt like props in a play about a family that didn't exist. Andrew's company handled the PR around the foundation, generating even more media attention. Donations began coming in from other tech companies, multiplying the impact. Within weeks, we'd established our first scholarship program and funded a technology center at my high school. 6 months later, I stood in that technology center, watching students work on coding projects using equipment I could never have dreamed of providing on our school's budget. My remaining shares in Neurotech had grown in value as the company expanded, providing a comfortable cushion for retirement, but not the extravagant wealth my family had briefly envisioned. Catherine and I had reached an uneasy truce. She got her kitchen renovation and a modest vacation fund. I got to support students without constant criticism. We both understood, without saying aloud, that our marriage had permanently shifted, not broken, but fundamentally changed by the revelation of who we were when money entered the equation. David eventually stopped asking about Andrew connections and focused on his sales career, occasionally acknowledging that perhaps his father's choices hadn't been completely misguided. Leah saved for her own condo down payment and, surprisingly, volunteered occasionally with the foundation, discovering she had a talent for mentoring young women interested in nonprofit work. My old teacher's watch, my father's Timex, still ticks in my pocket every day. Sometimes when I'm helping a student troubleshoot a coding problem or analyze a difficult text, I feel its weight and think about time, how it reveals the truth of relationships, how it measures the impact of small kindnesses, how it ultimately shows who people really are beneath the surface. The Shakespeare quote I keep on my classroom wall seems more relevant than ever. Time shall unfold what plighted cunning hides. Time had indeed unfolded many things in my life, some painful, some surprisingly beautiful. And while I've made peace with the fact that my family may never fully value the path I've chosen, I've found something perhaps more valuable: the clarity to see them in myself without illusion, plus the resources to help more students like Andrew find their way forward. That seems like a fair trade, even on the hardest days. After all, isn't that what teaching is really about? Not accumulating gratitude or recognition, but planting seeds that grow long after we're gone, often in ways we never anticipated. My father's watch keeps ticking. The students keep coming. And somewhere out there, other Andrews are waiting to be discovered, not by a startup whisperer or talent scout, but simply by someone who sees their potential and says, "I believe in you."